Welcome back to Tour With Us on Tuesdays here at the Onslow County Museum. When last we left off, we were having a visit from President George Washington. Well, what sort of a place might this have been when President Washington made his journey through our kind of backcountry? We know from his journal that he stopped at several locations, including the home of James and John Everett, who we'll learn more about with future Tour With Us Tuesdays. He also stopped at the home of the Foys and eventually made his way to Folkestone near Holly Ridge to stay at the Sage's Inn. And what did he observe? Well, he would have observed tall stands, thousands upon thousands of acres of longleaf pine trees. He would have seen springtime fields being prepared for planting. He would have seen what he referred to as indifferent homes. I guess when you compare it to Mount Vernon, almost anything sort of seems indifferent, doesn't it? But he would have stopped at the homes, and really not necessarily their homes, because he made a real definite attempt to not stop at personal homes, but he stayed at ordinaries or inns or taverns that were located on these properties, where he would have had a meal, where he would have fed and watered and rested his horses, and then moving through. Well, we talk about this place that he would have seen. We talk about these thousands of acres here in the museum section on the antebellum period. The word antebellum means before the war, and the war they're referring to in this case is the American Civil War, which we'll touch on when we visit with you next week. But in Antebellum Onslow, what does that mean? This is an agricultural community. It is centered in the production of goods. And what were those goods? Well, certainly cotton was grown at the Palo Alto plantation in the Belgrade-Swansboro community. But by far the largest by acreage plantation was known as the Richlands, and that was about 4 miles from here at the museum. It was about 22,000 acres, and so much of it was for the production of tar, pitch, turpentine, or naval stores. We always talk about Onslow County, North Carolina. We're Tar Heels, right? Well, that is because we produce tar, pitch, and turpentine. But we want to dig deeper in this section of the exhibit. We see that we are farming. We see that we are growing cotton and tar, pitch, and turpentine. We're growing corn. But who is doing that labor? Well, we certainly know from all of the records that we have that this was the work of enslaved peoples, people who were owned, who were held in bondage on these plantations. Now, we have a growing resource of information about these enslaved peoples. They certainly did not have their own voice at the time. And where can we find their voice? Where can we find the story of these people? Well, this is something we're working on. You can see here at the museum that this section of the exhibit is currently undergoing some change, because we are going to be able to tell that story much more inclusively. One of the resources that we use is called The Old Plantation. It was actually written by James Battle Everett, who was the son of a planter here. I'm going to slip on my gloves because we don't like to handle our artifacts without them. And when we do this, we want to be mindful of how we read this work. You know, this work was written by the son of the planter. This was not written by a slave. And so certainly we know that the way in which he captures the story is sort of a glorification of these golden days. When we look at this, the one real revelation we've had is that Everett calls his slaves by name. So step one is we're giving name. He sometimes describes them physically, and so we can begin to picture what these enslaved peoples would have looked like. He talks about the landscape of the plantation, so we know where people would have lived and what conditions they would have lived under. One of our colleagues, Dr. David Soselsky, has made a great study of that plantation and of naval store plantations in general, and them as maritime underground railroads. And I would definitely commend that you look for Dr. Soselsky's work. And also you can actually read this entire work. It's been transcribed and you can find it, and we're going to put that link to that so that you can read this entire work. So we're evolving this story of antebellum life. As we move over to this side, not only are we talking about the growing information we have about the enslaved peoples, but also free people of color who lived here in the area. We're going to find out much more about them, especially the head of households that were women here in Onslow County. This is the life of an antebellum woman. We're going to tell you a little bit more about this. This section will also change and evolve, and we're going to have much more information about how these different communities overlap, how they engage. And so we want you to be looking for change the next time you visit us here in the museum to this antebellum section. We're going to take a brief pause. We're going to come back and talk to you about an important antebellum event, though, that will cement who we are as the United States of America. You know, as we were talking about, the antebellum period is this sort of morphing. Who are we as a nation as we kind of grow, and there are growing pains that go along with that. And certainly one of those moments is the War of 1812. I always tell people when they tour the museum, I felt a little bit sorry for the War of 1812. It sometimes gets lost, if you will, between the American Revolution and the American Civil War. But the War of 1812 had a significant player in its story from Onslow County. This is Captain Otway Burns. Captain Burns's family had been here for several generations prior to the War of 1812. He was a shipbuilder, he was a navigator, but what he was in the War of 1812 was a privateersman. We sometimes hear that phrase and jumble it up with that and a pirate, and what's the difference? Well, for a privateersman, this is a private sea merchant who is in fact sort of contracted, given a letter of marque or a letter of permission to engage the enemy in battles. As we said, the U.S. is still kind of ebbing and flowing, and who are we? We're growing as a nation. We're still yet a baby nation, and we have to fight a second war with England. Now, this War of 1812 lasts actually until 1814, and people like Captain Burns' story helped that happen. Let me refer you back to a couple of our other Facebook postings. As we said, Captain Burns is a shipbuilder, so you might want to take a look at our posting about the Prometheus, a ship that he built, and also more information about the War of 1812. When you have an opportunity to come back here and visit us, we want you to take a look here and learn about the War of 1812, but also we invite you to visit history. Get out and see it. So if you go out to the community, to the town of Swansboro, you will actually also see this statue. This is the plaster cast of the bronze that stands there at Bicentennial Park. So you can actually see the river, see where Otway Burns would have actually sailed his ship. I also give you one more little trivia fact about Captain Burns. Captain Burns was in the state legislature. He cast the deciding vote that would open up the western part of North Carolina for settlement, for the confirmation of counties there, as well as shifting the capital to the center of the state. He wasn't reelected, but he did get a town, kind of county seat, if you will, and definitely county seat for Yancey County, named in his honor. So standing in the mountains of North Carolina in Yancey County, in the county seat of Burnsville, you will also see a statue of a sea captain in the middle of the North Carolina mountains. Visit us here at the Onslow County Museum when we're open and ready to go. But for now, we want you to take these Tour With Us Tuesdays and get these behind the scenes looks. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.